Good evening, everyone. What a great day. What a great night. Thank you all for being here. Woo! My name is Colleen Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Club. I'm so pleased to be hosting in this evening's event, this great event with these smart friends of ours. Yeah. But first, let me start by acknowledging the land that we're meeting on. For centuries, this territory has been the traditional home of many First Nations, the most recent being the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, and we are grateful for the opportunity to gather and learn on this land. So we thought that the words uncut and uncensored that we used was really, really different for the Canadian Club, and we're glad that you came out. It's sold out, so thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Our club is proud of the range of events we hold. They reflect our commitment to offering diverse topics and speakers in fun, electric, and vibrant atmosphere, and I really think that we've captured this here. I hope everyone has a drink and some food. So, electric and vibrant is something that also describes the Herle Burly podcast. Bombastic, irreverent, and enlightening, we hope. Podcasts are commonplace now, but the Herle Burly podcast is as relevant and timely as ever. As relevant and timely as podcasts should be, and we are grateful to have the friends like this at our podium. But before I introduce them, let me thank the Insurance Bureau of Canada for being our sponsor today. Thank you. Yeah. We appreciate your support and what it brings to live discussions. We think that live discussions are more important than ever in this time and age of polarized discourse, so we're glad that we can all come together, share a drink, and discuss some really important issues. So please feel free to tweet or post about tonight's events. We have social handles on the table if you want to tag some of our speakers or the club. We'd love to hear from you. So now, on with the podcast. So the Herle Burly podcast is the destination for, might I say, hip and in-the-know facts who want a more meaningful and raw analysis of Election 43. We are lucky to be able to hear and see them live. So let's hope these dialed-in politicos make some bold predictions and share some interesting insights with us tonight about what might happen on Monday. Who wants to know? Everybody needs to know. Right. So David Herle, Jenni Byrne, and Scott Reid bring a ton of expertise and experience in political strategy, political campaigning, to their fresh, no-holds-barred conversations and stories. So we have high expectations. So first off, David Herle is the owner of the Gandalf Group. He's been around liberal politics for a while. 100 years. The Herle Burly was created as a platform for honest talk and respectful debate. So starting in 2017, guests such as David Axelrod, Robbie Robertson, Thomas Frank have gone head-to-head with David about politics and culture, and we're sure glad for that. So Jenni Byrne is a conservative strategist who served as Director of Issues Management for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. She was also his Deputy Chief of Staff. Jenni was the Conservative Party National Campaign Manager in 2011 and 2015. And
11 was a lot more fun.
Yeah. And last year, she was a key player in the Conservative provincial campaign. So it's no holds barred. So Scott Reid is a senior strategic communications professional. 13 years ago, he helped found Festick Reid. It develops public affairs and communication strategies and services for C-level executives. He's one of the country's best-known political commentators from CTV, Globe and Mail, Star, Globe. He seems to be everywhere. And he also served, by the way, as the communications director for Prime Minister Paul Martin. So a great panel with us. And after their discussion, we're going to open the floor to questions. So make sure you start thinking about those questions. And we'll be joined by two more wise and experienced commentators who have appeared on the Herle Burly campaign strategy advertising episodes. Dennis Matthews is Vice President in Marketing and Communications at Enterprise Canada, which is a strategic communications firm in Toronto. Dennis has a wealth of experience in the public and private sector, including serving as day one staff member in the office of Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And also joining us is David Rosenberg. Woo! He is the Chief Creative Officer at Ben Simon Byrne. Trained as a writer, David has worked with a multitude of top-notch brands, and he also created liberal political advertising both federally and provincially, including 2015's federal Liberal campaign. Sorry, Jenni. So, audience, do not forget to formulate your questions for Q&A session. Commentators, the gloves are off. Over to you. Woo!
I actually, Scott, up until this moment, did not know that Dennis was a day one employee of Stephen Harper. Did he happen to trip you as you were passing in the doorway, heading out of Langemer or something like that?
No, it affected my opinion of him, though, I'll tell you that much. Asshole.
All right, I got a few notes here because I want to make sure that we get this right. My name is David Herle, host of the Herle Burly. I want to first thank the Canadian Club for having this event. They came to us. They cold called us and said, we'd like to do something with your podcast and do this event. And it's really exciting for us to do it, and we're thrilled. So thank you, Colleen, and thank you to the Canadian Club for doing this. I want to also thank the Insurance Bureau of Canada for supporting this event. I want to really thank Hawkins Cheesies for supporting this event. Everybody knows that the Hawkins Cheesy is the best cheesy in the world, perhaps the only cheesy that can call itself a cheesy in the world. And so Hawkins has graciously provided, and help yourself, cheesies for everybody here. A little shout out to the Coca-Cola Company, who heard me mention on a podcast that I like to drink rum and Coke, and they sent me Coke, but no fucking rum. Anyway. There's 4 people here that this podcast would not exist without, and I want to just quickly mention them. That is Jill Engelman, Michael Spitali, David Rosenberg, and Jody Calero, who have been instrumental to the creation and support of this project throughout. I want to thank, obviously, Jenni and Scott, who made this podcast something completely different than it was and has turned it into a bit of a thing and a buzzworthy event in this election campaign, and that's really on them. And lastly, I want to thank Ted and the folks at the Pilot for having us here to this historic event. So, with that over with, thank you. This is not a historic event. This is an event in a historic event. It's something. It's a good
historic.
Thank you.
It's a Roman-like event.
Thank you to Ted and the Pilot. Anyway, so we're down to the short strokes. We are joined by Jenni and Scott. Jenni Byrne, I've really gotten to know through doing this podcast, and what a delight it has been to get to know you. She's whip smart, and she's funny and fun to be around, and she takes no shit from Reid, which is her best feature on this podcast. Scott.
I'm dead. These two people both had the best laughs in the world, right? Listen to that.
Scott Reid has been my friend for a very, very long time. I think that he's a bit of a revelation to a lot of people through this podcast, because many of you only know Scott through his very formal appearances on CTV or the smaller networks, cable channels that have him on. And you may occasionally find him writing in the Huffington Post, for example. So I feel like in this podcast, a little secret that some of us who are friends of Scott's have known all this time, and that's how freaking funny this guy is. Jenni and I have good senses of humor. Scott has professional quality comedy at his disposal.
Right, yeah. Let's start by diminishing expectations. Ready to start?
I'm just gonna, and this may be something you could think of for questions. I'm just gonna say one thing. One time in a bar, when he was off on one of his outrageous tangents, I said to Scott, I said, where do you come up with all this fucking shit? And he said, here's the scary thing. I only say 10% of it.
Yeah. Well, 90 would put you in prison.
So let's start off. All of us have been in tight elections.
Yep.
Elections that came down to the wire. And we've played different roles in those things. So Scott, maybe I could start off with you. You have been on the plane with the leader in an election that was this close and coming down to the wire. What's that like?
Well, let me start by just, for everybody, and don't mean to be obnoxious, but just by defining, the plane means you're in the air, on the road with the Prime Minister, as opposed to, or the leader, as opposed to being back at central headquarters, right? So that's the distinction. And
Doing the real work on election day.
That's right. Actually, it is right. Because, like, it really is right. Because often on election day, there's about 6 hours, you're like, well, what do I do with myself, right? And the answer to that question is usually drink. So I think the thing that most people would be most surprised about is that in that last 48 hours on close elections, and we were in 2 close elections where David, and we've been in more than a couple of elections together, but in 2004, 2006, both were close elections. But it was very tense. Because of the circumstance, it was not tense because we did not know the outcome. We knew the outcome. So in 2004, we're watching people on television talk all day long about how it's incalculably close and impossible to call. But David had told us already, because David didn't talk about himself, David is the best pollster in Canada. Okay? The best. Okay? And I'm not just saying that because of his hair, although it contributes mightily to his success.
Samson.
But David is disciplined, he's professional, he's rigorous, he's focused, and most of all, most of all, he's honest. And that's what really matters in an election campaign, because he's honest about what the numbers are and what the numbers aren't. And so in 2004, we're watching television telling us that it's a toss-up, and David is like, we won. We won. Like, we fucking won, okay? So we have to prepare for how we're going to manage this situation, because we won, but it's a minority, so we're going to have to figure it out. We've got to recalculate it. Haven't had a minority government for a long time in Canada. Do we reach out to Hugh Segal, who had one in Ontario a few years ago? All that kind of stuff, right? But we've won. 2006, we've lost. So prepare for a different thing. Same scenario. People are saying, well, it's too close to cost. We know. So the first and most important thing I want to impress on people is that I don't know what people in the various campaigns right now, and I hope we pick up on this, because I think it's interesting that Scheer spent all day long saying, our internals say we're winning.
Okay.
Because I don't think he's lying. Like, I don't think he's trying to spin us.
You know, you're jumping.
I know. But I want to come back to that, because
What are you doing on the plane today? If you're on the plane today, what are you doing?
So what I'm doing is this.
You're drinking.
That is for sure. When did you and Festruck start drinking in the morning?
At 7:30 a.m.
But
You
it's
think
5
I'm-
o'clock somewhere.
No, but you think that's a joke. But in 2004, I'm not kidding. Festruck is here, and he can back me up. So in 2004, we're going to win the election campaign. And so what happens is, on the plane physically, Scott and I are sitting in the first row behind the Prime Minister and his wife. And we decide that a great way to demonstrate momentum and to really push this ball over the line is to go from coast to coast. We start in Newfoundland at the beginning of the morning, pre-morning, and we're going to fly all the way and end the day in Vancouver. He's going to dip his feet in both his feet. I know it's not nice to think about Paul Martin's feet. We're going to dip in both oceans. We go ocean to ocean. And Scott and I are like, listen, if we're going to work 24 hours in this day, we're going to fucking drink for 24 hours in this day. And these two incredible women who worked on our plane, like, they would like just bring us beer every time Scott and I got on the plane. Didn't matter what time it was. But like now it's like 7 o'clock in the morning. They bring us beer, and so we're sitting there and we're like drinking beer. And the Prime Minister hears us cracking open beer, and he's like, "This isn't why they're drinking beer."
You're supposed to be writing his speech.
He's writing my speech, and then we're like, but the truth is, writing a speech isn't that hard. We've written the speech already, so we can plug in a couple of different lines. So you hear, nice to be in Mississauga, nice to be in Halifax, nice to be in Chester, right? But like we're like, yeah, I write that, and then we start writing fake lines for his speech, right? Like sort of like, go fuck yourself, San Diego kind of lines, right? We're laughing and we're drinking beer, and he's like, why are they laughing? He's like getting mad. He's like turning back around, all that stuff. And then you would land on the ground, and it's 1 o'clock, and we're in Manitoba, and we're trashed. And people are like, well, we are obviously well and truly fucked if you guys are sideways at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We're like, no, Herle says we're going to win. We just like to drink beer all day long. So that's what it's like to be on the last day when you're winning.
Wow.
You must have had the same experience in...
that's what you do in headquarters?
When you do in headquarters, when you're pulling out the boat?
You drink all day.
Even when...
By the way, I asked for a rum and Coke, and could I get it whenever we get a chance?
I think he might need a double.
No.
There we go.
Okay, Jenni, you
No,
now have 20 minutes.
I'll be honest. Yeah, no, I'll take a quarter of the time that Scott just.
Sorry, yeah.
Probably because even being on a winning campaign for the Conservatives, we weren't drinking beer at 7:30 a.m.
Who wants to be a conservative?
Yeah, so not being a comms person, being a ground person,
Being a real person.
being a person that actually delivers votes and all that kind of.
Yeah, that's fair.
I will say that 2011, we knew we were winning. 2015, I can say that for the most part, most of us knew we weren't winning. 2011 was a much more fun campaign to be part of. That campaign, actually, I oversaw things from Calgary. We had a little war room set up. I could watch the voter ID numbers. I put some Crest white strips on my teeth in the morning, sat in my pajamas, listened to the Prime Minister talk to George W. Bush, who thanked him. Steve, it's a good one. You're going to win this election today.
Steve.
Yeah, so on election day, there's actually nothing much more that can happen at this point.
Are you in headquarters?
No, in 2011, I was at our war room in the Hyatt getting my teeth bleached.
Right.
In 2015, I was at HQ.
Right.
With staff who were coming up to me going, there's a possibility I think we might not win today.
Yeah.
And slight. The Liberals winning 32 out of 32
Why are
seats
you
in
there?
Atlantic
What's left
Canada.
to do? What's
Yeah,
left to do?
yeah.
Why are you there?
Well, what's left to do is you're dealing with people on the ground. So you're dealing with our people that are getting their votes out. So, for example, if you're centralizing your voter identification or your voter ID and your GOTV, you're watching your voters actually go out and vote. So you're watching people based on your phones or based on computer. You're seeing if they go and vote. So if someone goes and votes,
Right.
someone is marking it on what we call a bingo sheet, and that's being then communicated back to us in the war room. So we know that if in Cumberland, Colchester, and Nova Scotia, that we're not getting our vote out, we can actually turn on the phones and actually put more calls into Cumberland, Colchester to get them out to vote.
So in 2015, were you freaked out about the fact you weren't getting your vote out, or were you worried about the fact that the vote that was getting out was actually not really your vote?
I was a bit of both.
Okay.
It's an interesting question, by the way. Like right now,
Yeah.
in this circumstance, where the NDP have gone from, say, 10% to maybe 18% or something like that, almost all of it taken from the Liberal Party. Mm-hmm. Okay, how do the Liberals ensure they're not pulling New Democrats?
They don't know at this point. There's no way you know. So in 2015, we had record number. When we went into the final weekend of the election, we had more votes identified than any election I've ever been part of. And going back from 1997 onwards. The problem is even people we identified in June and July of 2015, they were turning on us. They weren't voting for us.
Right.
So we were getting the vote out, but they weren't necessarily voting for us. And at this point, there's nothing you can do. So at this point, there is no nasty ad that you can put out that's going to change people. The only thing you can do is contact the people that you have in your list, in your databases, and get them out to vote. And hope, like pray to fuck that they're still supporting you.
Right. Okay, so you've both been advisors, very, very senior advisors to prime ministers who were going down to defeat. Okay? And knew it in both cases. What kind of counsel, what are leaders looking for from their senior staff in that circumstance, in the final days?
Why don't
let
you go first? No, but fucking seriously, why don't you go first?
It's human nature. Leaders are looking at hearing the truth. They want to know how unpopular they are and how people are voting against them, and that we're probably going to lose, and 100 of their closest friends and family are going to be out of jobs. So, no, I think that it is very hard in terms of dealing with a whole host of people when you actually realize that you're not winning, because
The responsibility, like they feel a lot of responsibility.
well, and because it's not just, and this will sound very, very glib, because everyone's like, oh, you political staffers and what have you. And so I know how this sounds in saying it out loud, but when you're in government, and you guys know, there are like hundreds of people who are getting a paycheck based on working for cabinet ministers or MPs. They're MPs themselves. And you're sitting there knowing that you're about to go down in defeat, and not only are you dealing with the prime minister, the leader, who is publicly going to have to fucking take it on the chin and deal with it, but you're also looking at people that have to pay their mortgages, and they might, have small kids and what have you, and all these people are going to be out of jobs, and it's a very it's not a fun place to be, but at this point, when you're 3 days away from an election campaign, you're not trying to
Are you sort of a support group for it?
Kind of, because at this point, most campaign managers, 3 days in, good or bad, There's been very few campaigns.
Well, sometimes in the provincial, I knew 3 days in, literally 3 days in. Not 3 days out, 3 days in.
Unless of course you're Tim Hudak and you think election night you're still winning.
And now a word from our sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association.
Don't shit for you eat.
No, but at the end, at this point, and David, I would like to hear you talk about this. At this point, at 3 days left to go before Election Day happens. There's only been one, a by-election in Brandon, Manitoba in the fall of 2013 that I literally, Election Day, as the polls closed, I had no clue. That was the only election that I have ever managed, at a riding level or a national level, that I did not know. So, but you have 3 days of people pulling to get their vote out on the ground. You have a skeleton staff in the war room, and then you have the leader and his entourage, and you're trying to keep everyone buoyed and trying to working, but also not trying to be like, hey, we're going to win a majority.
Be awesome. Be honest. Those committee rooms in the dying days of losing campaign are the most depressing places.
They're horrible.
Be right.
They're horrible.
Oh.
And we conservatives don't drink as much as you liberals, so we weren't drinking.
Oh my God! I would have done anything to transport myself out of the committee rooms last June. It was gruesome.
Right.
So you on the plane with a guy that's losing and knows it. He'd stopped asking me for the polling numbers anymore. Didn't want to know.
Didn't you?
Right. And other than getting drunk, what are you doing to support him in there?
Well, that was for sure my major contribution. Festchuk and I were talking about this tonight. Scott's here, and we were chatting about this very thing earlier because we were reminiscing about the end of 2006. One of the things, so first of all, the first thing I want to say actually is exactly what you said. I just want to reinforce it. Prime ministers feel the burden, right? The leaders feel the burden of all the people whose paychecks and lives and livelihoods rely upon them, right? So people love to be cynical about politicians and say, you know, they're all in it for themselves and all this kind of horrible stuff. But those people spend that last 3-4 days, and it's about the last 3-4 days when you finally come to Jesus and realize when you're losing that you're losing, right? They spend those 3-4 days thinking about all of the scars that will be worn by others on their behalf, and so they take that hard. My 2006 story is, you know, I mean, Paul Martin was a punishing guy to write speeches for, right?
Just because he never read them.
No. That's mean. That's so mean. You're so mean.
He read them, he just didn't like them.
He just didn't like what Scott Festchuk and Scott Reid wrote for him. If he'd only found some guy named Roger who would write a speech, he would have enjoyed it, right? He was like, what's with these Scott people? No, but he was really severe. Paul was always tough on speechwriters, right? And he was always like, you know, we should do it this way. We need to restructure it. We need to stand here for 77 hours and rewrite speeches. And it was always a process with him. Like, it was a huge process with him. I see Terry O'Leary, she's laughing. Like, it's like, it was a monster process with Paul, okay, getting a speech out the door because he wanted to spend hours and hours and hours sweating every syllable and every word. And Scott Festchuk and I lived that for a long time. And on the night of the 2006 election, well, during the day, Scott and I predictably ordered a big bucket of Heineken to our hotel room and sat there and wrote the speech that we didn't want to write, but we knew we had to write. And so we wrote that speech, and then we carried it down to him in his hotel room, and we gave it to him. And the remarkable thing about that night and that moment is that Paul took a pen out. He always had a felt marker pen, and he took it out and he crossed out 2 things. He said, change this, change that, and then gave it back to us. There were no long revisions. There was no argument about structure. There was no nothing. It was like, that's it. Let's do it. And it wasn't a lack of care, and it wasn't a glibness. It was just like, let's get this fucking thing over with.
Okay, so it's been...
Sorry. I know.
No, well, that's what it's like. That is what it's like. So on to this current election campaign. There's been some activity this week. There have been the parties have still been trying to move some votes this week. Andrew Scheer's been talking about winning a majority government, or winning for sure that he's going to win. He's been very aggressively putting that out, sometimes majority, sometimes not, but he's insisting he's going to win. The Liberals trotted out an endorsement from no less than Barack Obama this week. And the NDP are trying to clean up their messaging about coalition this week. I want to ask you guys 2 things. One, what do you think about what the parties have been doing so far this week? What do you think about Scheer's majority talk? What do you think about the Obama endorsement? And are there any tactical plays left? Or is this thing literally now just in the hands of the gods? Or is there anything left people can do? Jenny, you go first.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well...
Otherwise, you might not get it.
Pour another rum into me. I'll talk until the sun comes up.
Well, I think I actually want to start by saying something that has not happened this campaign, and throw it back to you guys, is that what I have been surprised at is I woke up on all 3 of the debates where all the leaders participated in, expecting what you guys always did to us, and that is basically put out a debate destabilizer. And it was soul-crushing and awful, and I was waiting for, you know, the young pups at our war room to be able to have to deal with that, and it didn't happen. This week, I was waiting for ads about American citizenship and same-sex marriage, and I thought I'd wake up on Tuesday morning, and when I came with my coffee to do the Herle Burly, you guys would be like, make fun of the conservatives and what have you, and there is nothing. So I am very disappointed in the Liberals for not actually like running.
You must be very disappointed that they're not running as good a campaign as you wish that they
Imagine
were.
how we feel.
Well, I mean, I think there's two answers to your question. I mean, one of which is very trapped by language around Sunny Ways and not running negative advertising. I think they feel very, very constrained by that. But I think over the course of our conversations over this campaign, I've become convinced of something that I wasn't convinced of at the time, and I think that the whole brownface blackface incident has actually discombobulated the Liberal campaign much more than I thought.
Like, do you think the campaign or the Prime Minister?
I think the campaign, maybe the Prime Minister, I can't judge that. But I think that they are not running the campaign they intended to run, and I don't know that they were able to figure out a second one, a plan B. But I think they had a campaign plan starting off, and you could see it in the first week with the attacks on the Conservative candidates. I think they had a campaign plan that was built around moral high ground, and it was pulled out from under them on the blackface, brownface incident.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I agree with that really strongly. I think I agree with both points. And by the way, I'm not certain that they couldn't have still done those ads, and I wish they were doing those ads. So we'll see what happens on Monday night. Maybe they'll be triumphant, and that'll be that. My guess is that we'll end up in a tight minority situation, and we'll talk about predictions later. I think the answer to your original question is there's lots of cards you can still play in these last few days. I mean, I know that because I lived through that, because I sat in an airport hangar and listened to you tell me in 2004 we're going to put the following plays into action, and we did, and it helped us, and we increased our seat total.
That was earlier than the Friday before the campaign.
But not
Like
that much earlier. Not that much earlier. In
the
2000, well, let me put it, okay, well, I'll take up the challenge of the Friday before the campaign. 2006, we were at 85 seats. And we ended up with 106 seats. And that was because we put one ad on the air. And we've talked about it before on the podcast about abortion.
Put an ad in the air that laid out the logic case about how electing Harper would put a woman's right to choose at risk.
Right.
Pretty good, hard-hitting ad. We didn't tell the media it existed. And not even sure we told Paul it existed. And
no.
And I don't think he would have liked it. I don't think he would
No,
have liked
he
it
would
at
not.
all. And we put it out there. We put 700 GRPs behind it, and it went through the Conservative female vote like acid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It absolutely corroded them. And so I think there are lots of things you can do in the final days, and we're not in the absolute final days. So there are still going to be moves that will be made by various campaigns. I've not been blown away by any of the moves that have been made by any of the campaigns so far, although I'm particularly underimpressed by the NDP campaign because they're surging, and I've been a friend.
Man, they have no money. You've never
but they're
worked in a
not
campaign like
everyone-
that.
Okay, well that's
You've
fair.
never, like none of us have ever worked in a campaign. They must be the most frustrated people in the world because Dennis and David and I were talking about this on the
That's interesting.
on the ad podcast today. If that bump that they got, bump surge, whatever you want to call it, that they got out of the debates and that whole thing, if it had been one of our parties that had happened to, we had so much resources to pour behind that.
Paid
We would have had
media
ads
put behind
pushing
it.
that out, all
Okay,
that stuff.
But it's
They
not-
have
okay,
no money.
But guys, it's actually not that much of a surge. They're up potentially at the high watermark of where they ended the last campaign. That is not momentum. That is just kind of getting where they started the campaign.
Well, it's eating some Liberal seeds, so it's having an effect.
It could have been more if they'd had more to put behind it, though, right?
I don't know if it was. Like, it's easy
Who knows?
for us to it's easy for us to say, but they're essentially getting wiped out in Quebec. So, like,
Yeah.
even though they're sitting at 20%, which is what they got in the last election, we're all thinking it's momentum because they started so low, and because they're somewhat eating the Green Party's lunch, because Elizabeth May has completely shit the bed in terms of like running this campaign. That we think it's momentum, and it's just them actually holding their own, and not even that, because they could end up with less seats because the 12 current seats they have in Quebec, they probably are winning at this point.
So on the Quebec thing, to your point, David, about, well, they could probably be doing, if they had the resources, they could do something. But here's one thing they didn't need to do that they did, that I thought was lame, as an example, in this past couple of days. Taking Olivia Chow to Quebec and saying, this is a momentum builder, because in 2011, Jack Layton became Bon Jacques in the last few days, and so we're going to haul out Olivia Chow and try to reconjure that. I thought that was a lame, fully English media. If anything, it was only an English media play, and it really, really, really smelled weak to me. So I did not think that was.
Not like they have a lot of Quebec icons in their party.
I understand, but like, your point was they don't have a lot of paid media resources they can haul in. That's fine, but their earned media effort has not been crackerjack in the last handful of days.
Right, including the Christmas on the coalition thing. Right. Jenni, Obama's endorsement, inappropriate or not?
Yeah, sure. On the record, I would say inappropriate. It doesn't matter, but obviously it does. You know, Trudeau has tried to.
You're technically on the record. It's a podcast.
Trudeau has tried to style his whole leadership around Barack Obama, including looking like him.
Baby! That's a burn!
The burn. Line of the night, it will not be topped.
Oh my. All right. So.
I got a lot of jokes I want to tell, but I cannot tell any of them.
All right. Well, you know what? It is time flies when you're laughing like that. We are at our predictions stage. Uh-oh. All right. Who wants to go first?
Oh, I'm not giving a prediction tonight.
Oh, yes, you are.
Oh, no,
Come on.
Oh, yes, you are. Wait a second. It was on the agenda I sent to you, and I've got the response here. Got the response. It says, works for me.
But by that I meant accept the seventh topic. We were like,
No, come on, do it.
I think it's going to be a close one. I think.
Jesus Christ!
You know, after the 2004 election, Darrell Bricker sent out an internal memo to his staff at Ipsos Reid that
Oh, let's give it.
we may have got the government wrong, but we got it right that it was a minority.
I promise I will send you guys my predictions on Sunday, and so you can like.
Oh, is that good enough for the crowd?
I don't think
Is
so.
that good enough
I
for
don't
the
think
crowd? Hey, I think Jenni's family wants to know her prediction.
Yeah! Her mom is cheering. David, not Jenni. Come on, give us a prediction.
No, I've already said I'll tell you guys on Sunday.
All right.
Come on, let's hear yours.
You're a hard ass, man. Holy moly, no wonder you work for Harper. All right. I got some paper here. I've been doing some figuring and
Deciphering.
some calculations, some astrological charts and all that sort of stuff. And I predict the
How
following.
long did it take you to find out how many ridings there are?
Well, I know nothing about politics, as this podcast has demonstrated, right? I couldn't believe.
Sylvia Presenza's ringtone. Recognize it anywhere.
Oh my gosh. Mission Impossible, that's quite an omen. So I think the following. I think the Liberals will win 139 seats.
That was my
Falls
stepmom, by the way.
disagrees.
That was
And
my
her
stepmom.
fault.
The crowd was Jenny's family. I think the Conservatives will win 123 seats, which I think you should be pretty fucking happy to get. Frankly, with a guy like that as your leader. Jeepers creepers. The New Democrats are going to get 36, which is unbelievable. I mean, let's just, for 1 second, can we pause and say that we all started the podcast by saying the Jagmeet Singh was a giant disaster, the NDP were going to be a train wreck, they were going to be wiped out of party status, and they're awful. And we turn out to be awful. They have run a good campaign. He has been a good campaigner, and we were wrong, and he has been dynamite, eh?
Yeah. No.
I mean, seriously, like, he has owned us.
No.
I say the Greens are going to get 6. I told this to my son earlier tonight. He says, where the fuck do you get 6 seats for the Greens?
I don't think the Greens even have themselves winning 6.
I know. I'm not good at this. I'm not a ground game guy. And I think the Bloc are going to get 43, and I'm really, really, really terrified that that's an underestimate, because I think that the Bloc, I think the NDP thing is stopped. I don't know that the Bloc thing is stopped, and I don't know where it stops. So I don't know that 43 is the top of their horizon. But those are my predictions, so it's a Liberal minority.
Liberals 141.
We're pretty close.
Conservatives 123. NDP 20. Greens 3. Bloc 42.
Wait.
You guys both have the Bloc very high.
Yeah.
Jenni, give your prediction. You're the better than both.
So, my rationale.
The Conservatives get 336 seats, and fuck them.
I don't know much about Quebec, and I don't know much about BC. Michelle Cadario's been telling me what I know about BC. Quebec, I know you don't need a ground game, so the fact that the Bloc are taking off, that could easily just be reflected in the seat count. But the thing that I'm most relying on for this prediction is the fact that the pollsters that I most trust in this election campaign are...
Name them.
Frank Graves at Ecos Research, Greg Lyle at Innovative Research, and Nick Nanos, primarily because those are the people using telephone to do their polling, and they are all saying that the Liberals are winning Ontario, and I don't think the Conservatives can win this election if they don't win Ontario. I don't see how they can get a plurality of seats if they don't win the most seats in Ontario, and the pollsters I trust are saying that's not going to happen. So,
Okay.
small Liberal plurality.
Why? Okay, I have a question to ask both of you then, because you're a pollster and you're a Conservative. Why is Andrew Scheer going on my radio station, News Talk 1010 this morning?
The one you own.
I own it. Well, I'd like to think I own it. I go on and shoot my mouth off, and I figure that gives me ownership rights. But why does he go on News Talk 1010? And why are Conservatives that we know and like and believe so insistent they are for sure going to win based on their internal polls the plurality of seats? Because I've heard it over and over for the last few days.
There are pollsters that are saying that. There are, that's what Ipsos Reid says, that's what Angus Reid says. There's a couple other polling organizations that say that the two parties are effectively tied in Ontario, and that the Conservatives have a turnout advantage based on a more motivated vote on their side. So on the basis of that, those polling organizations predict the Conservatives win Ontario. I just think
so. It's
wrong.
A behavioral thing. It's not an empirical thing. It's an assumption that there will be a higher turnout for.
No, it's two things. It's two things. One of which is, in my view, some of those organizations have panels that lean conservative, and historically lean conservative. Ipsos Reid is always more conservative than the reality turns out to be, and so they are showing, whereas the other companies are showing the Liberals with somewhere between a 5 and 10 point lead in Ontario, they're showing that parties tied in Ontario, and then on top of that, they say, and then the Conservatives have a turnout advantage. So that's how they get to the Conservatives winning the most seats in those organizations.
A non-pollster view of that is, I am not privy to any of the polling that we have in the Conservative war room, but as a campaign manager on the ground or at a national level, it's not a message that I would want to put out, because you want to actually have your supporters feel that there is a need for them to go out and vote. And if they think that there is it's a foregone conclusion and you're going to win, a lost cause, or you're so ahead that it doesn't matter, they're not going to go out and vote. So I am assuming there are people a lot smarter than me that are making decisions, but it's not a message that I would be pushing out at this point in the campaign.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to move into the next phase of this operation. I'm going to ask Dennis Matthews and David Rosenberg to come up here. Woo! Dennis from Enterprise Canada, David from Ben Simon Byrne. These are two people that have faced off against each other in campaigns designing ads for opposing parties, and they have both won a lot of elections with their effort. You guys stay here.
Oh, you want
guys
us
are
to
staying here.
stay?
Oh, no. Yeah, you're not getting off that easy.
Scott,
Come on
we
up.
can talk about ads, things we don't know anything
Yeah.
about. But
Come on up.
I thought we were
pretend.
going to the bar. Could I get
So-
a beer somehow? A Stella. I'd kill for a Stella.
So for those of you that are confused, the bald guy's name starts with D.
And 2 Davids.
The two Davids. So, you guys, we just taped a podcast today, recorded a podcast today. It's out this afternoon where we analyzed the last set of ads. So if people want a detailed discussion of the advertising that's been put out by the parties right now, check out the latest edition of the Herle Burly that came out this afternoon. But I would look to you guys right now to sort of sum up what you've seen from the parties' communications efforts, all the parties' communications efforts over the campaign, and how you'd summarize what you've seen, and if you've seen anything that made an impact on you positively or negatively, and maybe at the end of the day, which party's advertising helped itself the best.
All right, I'll go first. I guess if there's one word to describe, the entire library of ads that I've seen from every party, it would be disappointing. I talked a little bit about this on the podcast this morning. Coming at it as a creative guy, the first thing you do when you sit down with a brief on a strategy or a message track is you try to ask yourself the question, what can I do on this brief that pushes the peanut a little further, that hasn't been seen before, that is original to this message? And I've seen a lot of competent ads in this campaign, but I haven't seen any ad that breaks through the clutter in a way that makes people go, oh, well, that's interesting. That builds a sense of momentum. That makes me think of a candidate in a different way, because there hasn't been any kind of original, creative, organizing idea in any of the ads. I say original. There's been creative organizing ideas in a few of the ads for different parties. And I'll answer, after Dennis speaks, I'll answer the second part of your question. But I haven't seen anything that was truly breakthrough.
Okay. Dennis.
Yeah, I think one of the one of the big challenges of this campaign has been lack of public engagement. And you folks have called it the Seinfeld election. There's been other descriptions for it. And when you look at campaign advertising, this is the biggest single expense of a campaign. You'll spend maybe $25 million on your election campaign, and half of that will go into advertising. It is your chance to reach low information voters. It is your chance to persuade people and mobilize. And talking about the cool stuff that happens to get people out to vote and all that, that's expensive too. But the money and effort that goes into advertising is so overwhelming on a campaign, you can't get it wrong. And when I look at each of the parties this time, there's some stuff I like, and we definitely got into it in the podcast and didn't. I think one of the struggles for each of the parties is none of them had something so big or so interesting going on that they really punched through and took it from where they were to a whole higher level. When you look at the parties itself, I think the Conservatives they definitely get an award for a focus and a determination. They never veered from an affordability script the entire campaign.
Message discipline.
Every ad hit on the same themes, and that is hard to do because you get distracted, you come up with theories and ideas, and if we only do this, maybe it'll move the needle.
Can I stop you right there, Dennis, though, for a second? Because you, early in this campaign, and if anybody hasn't read it, literally go back and still read it, a brilliant thread on Twitter about what affordability actually meant and where the affordability emotional nexus was with people. And we agreed on the podcast today that nobody found that sweet spot in this campaign. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we live in a world where there's a polling question I love. You ask people, do you think you'll be better off than your parents' generation? And this is the first group out there who thinks they won't do as well as the generation before them. This is an existential thing in our society. And I think sometimes this gets mixed up in dollars and cents. Well, if only I had, $50 extra a month, or my cell phone bill was cheaper, or other things, I'd be better off. I think it's a lot bigger than that. This is a group of people who want the bigger home. They want to be able to take their kids to Disneyland for vacation. They want to do bigger things, and it's not just I can't get by this week. It's I want a better life, and it's not quite there for me. And I think you see that in Toronto a lot with housing, for example. And people don't say housing affordability. It's you got people who are looking at $1.5 million home as a starter home, and they're saying that's not available to me. And there's an aspirational element to this, and I think that none of the parties has fully tapped into that. We talked about an ad today. The final Conservative ad, I think, started hitting at that. But we've got sort of 4 or 5 days left. So I think that was a bit of a miss for me in the campaign.
appears to me that the negative ads in this campaign from any of the parties are not as negative ads have been
Have there
in the
been
past.
any?
Well, not really. No. I mean, the Conservatives have done some stuff. Well, both parties have done some stuff on social media, but on television, it's been contrast more than it's been hard-hitting attacks. David?
Yeah, it's been pretty rational. I mean, the Conservatives just came out with what I would call a ledger versus ledger ad. Trudeau will cost you more. Conservatives will put more money in your pocket. Very rational contrast. Trudeau's been banging away at, a progressive set of ideas versus ideas that he claims will take the country backward. It's all been, as I say, just in terms of all of the ads, really rational. Hasn't laddered up to anything really emotionally affecting.
Yeah.
And
why?
Yeah.
Why?
And
Dennis, I want to ask you a question. Why? Because I understand, David, you offered an explanation for why the Liberals won't do that, which I think, by the way, is a mistake. Like, I think there should have been photographs on my television while I was watching hockey and football in the last weekend of Doug Ford and Andrew Scheer, and it should have said they'll wreck your lives. Okay, that's what
Jenni
I think
was
the
looking
Liberal
for
ad
it.
should have been.
Jenni was looking for that ad.
With evidence.
I was.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't even care. Fuck the evidence. Like, just they're gonna wreck your lives.
No, you can't.
okay?
You can't fuck the evidence. The evidence counts.
There's plenty of evidence. So,
Like soldiers in your streets. The
Yeah,
Conservatives
like-
are gonna put
If you
soldiers
if
in
you
your
over
streets.
egg,
like
No
if,
mas!
if
No
but-
mas! No mas!
Jenny's right. If you over egg the evidence, it will not work. It's got to be believable.
I know
Oh,
that.
No
that
teachers
ad
in your
tested through the
school.
roof, that thing would have soared.
So I understand on David's explanation tells me why the Liberals didn't go there. Why didn't the Conservatives?
I think for for the Liberals, I agree. It's just the sunny ways, like they're stuck in that matrix. For Conservatives, I think there's a positive to the reason they didn't. They were so focused on affordability and cost of living and the fact that a Trudeau government will cost you more. The proof points that you might have been looking for, or thinking that why weren't they in ads, whether it's some of the SNC Lavalin, whether it's black or brown face, whether it's other things that would feature in a traditional attack ad, the treatment of Jody Wilson-Raybould. I think these things they're interesting points, and I think there may be even points that would win voters on an emotional level.
But
But
affordability ad. You could have picked up on your theme. You could have said, you're falling behind. You're going to have to downsize your life as a 905er, and it's shitty.
yeah.
Can't heat your house.
No, and I think if you take a look at the whole set, and I'm obviously not, I haven't been involved, so it's great questions for the folks who are working on them. But I think the desire to be so focused on that, this will cost you this, we'll save you that, it puts you in a box. And we'll see on election day, maybe it was brilliant. We'll all be here saying, they were so focused on it that worked. I do think this emotional connection that we've talked a lot on the podcast.
Didn't happen.
You've seen a ton of dealership ads, dealership car ads this election campaign. You haven't seen automotive brand advertising.
I love that.
And I think that's, it's David's line. I think it's a great way to describe a lot of what we saw.
But just one sec. What was the Hazel ad in 2015, if not a closing week negative ad?
It was
cloaked,
It was a great ad.
but
It was
cloaked
dynamite.
in a woman you could believe, but who also touched on issues like the empowerment of seniors, and did it in a way that made you smile, but was entirely a negative ad because it basically said Harper was lying.
Right.
So why haven't they been able to achieve something like that this time around?
I don't know. But I also presume that the advertising has a fair bit to do with why the campaign hasn't crystallized around an idea or a choice, because it's often the advertising that performs that function. But you have to get to an emotional level in which to do that. That's the 1988 border erasing Liberal ad, or some of the stuff we ran against Mr. Harper in 2004.
Is that a different era? So I'm constantly confronted with people who tell me I'm a dinosaur, and they say, yeah, you don't understand it. It's all about clicks and digital, and so it's like if you care about this, then you follow that trail and whatever, and so you don't understand. There is no mass media.
No, you can still do it. You can still do it. We put an anti-Ford ad on TV at the beginning of the last provincial campaign, and it was tremendously successful at hurting Ford, just not in our favor. It moved all the votes to the NDP. Put us out of the campaign immediately.
Right.
My first strategic...
We're called strategists.
My first strategic decision ended the Liberal campaign. So, Jenni, you're the ground game person. And in my view, the Conservatives are 100% about ground game right now. There are no
All the campaign should be 100% about ground game.
Well, not really. Not really. The Liberals are still in a fight for votes with the NDP.
Okay,
and
but
the Greens,
but they've got to
and
get
some
their
extent
votes.
with the
But
Bloc.
that's the ground game. They've got to get their votes out.
They
If
do. But they're still actually competing for new votes. They're fighting the NDP for votes. Let me just finish. The Conservatives.
all right.
All right. Conservatives are not fighting for votes anymore. There are no swing votes between the Conservatives and anybody else. So the Conservatives are entirely focused, I presume, on getting their vote out. What kind of advertising supports that initiative? You can now take issue with any of my assumptions.
Listen, I actually think for the most part, there is no advertising right now that's going to change anything. Like it is for the most part, it's done. Like it is now 100%. There is no more votes you're going to ID. There is no more, like you can be lucky if people are swinging back and forth. Putting their car keys in a bowl and hoping to change at the end of the day, but it's not. Did
this turn into a key party?
Right? That was
Did this
a weird.
turn into a key party?
That was a strange analogy, wasn't it?
Is everybody here in the lifestyle?
The doors lock at 10, in case you're wondering. And then it gets weird. Welcome to the Canadian Club.
But no, it's. I actually think for the most part, most votes are solidified. There's almost no. There is almost no opportunity at this.
And you don't want air cover for get out the vote. You don't need air cover to get out the vote.
I don't think but. Sure, but it's not going to happen on this campaign. Like, I guess for me, I'd be looking at it as someone getting out the vote, that it's not going to happen. It's not like you guys have great ads, we have great ads, the NDP has great ads. It's not happening. So right now, you are looking at if you're in a riding and you've got 10,000 identified supporters, you should have more. You should have more than that. But if you have 10,000 identified supporters, you're figuring out what went out at the advanced polls and how the fuck you're going to drag them out on Monday to vote. There's really not, it's really that simple. All the other mechanics and the kind of sexy stuff that we're talking about, it's done. It is a matter of like knocking on doors and making phone calls and all that kind of stuff right now.
So the time of the campaign when Reid goes drinking.
Scott can drink now.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Scott,
well,
Scott,
that's
Scott,
not. That's
Scott
not.
cannot drink. Okay,
It's not a wise way to characterize it.
this is the point at the night at which the professionals who run the Canadian Club tell us that you're bored. And so we must wrap up at this time, but we'll wrap up this part of it. Now we're going to open the floor to questions, comments, any observations people want to make. If we were organizers, we would have seeded the question period because nobody ever wants to get up first. You have to get some.
Yeah, this
There'd be a 17-year-old son who would look remarkably like me. Dear not dad, what are the most amazing accomplishments of your political life?
Scott, I have a question.
I have a question.
Maxime Bernier, not a word on him, nothing on the impact on the Conservative vote. Is he a non-factor in this? You guys did not even mention him.
No, I don't think he's a non-factor. I think that Max might have a very hard time winning seats, but he could easily prevent people, and by people I mean Conservatives, from he could be a spoiler. If you look, he is polling anywhere to 2 to 3% in Ontario ridings. If we're looking at 905 seats that are close, they could come down to 2 or 3%. So he could be a spoiler. If you look at Jagmeet Singh's by-election in Burnaby South, the People's Party got 11% of the vote in that riding. So even if in British Columbia or different ridings he gets half of that, it doesn't mean that he will win. But Max could be Max and the People's Party could be a spoiler. And in terms for his campaign, he is running against another Maxime Bernier for the Rhinoceros Party named Maxime Bernier. But keep in mind, in terms of the name recognition in the Beauce, his dad ran as an independent, the King of the Beauce. That's why Max has the nickname the Prince of the Beauce. Makes sense. It's all.
Dauphin, I think they
said. Bernier's dad won as an independent in the 1993 election, and then I believe Chrétien appointed him as the ambassador to Haiti.
Really?
Yeah.
Ambassador to what?
Haiti.
Haiti.
We have
All right.
Where they speak French, in case you're not. Can I just think this, and I've said it since the beginning of the podcast. I think that he will uncomfortably outpoll his numbers.
He'll outperform his polls.
He will.
There's a hidden Byrne vote.
I
hidden
think that's
racist
true,
Vote.
and I think we'll find it particularly and uncomfortably, surprisingly, in British Columbia. I think we'll see that he will outpoll his vote. He will outperform his poll, but I think he'll lose his own riding for all those reasons, and the BQ surge.
I do think the one question on Bernier is when he's, whether he polls 2 or 5% in a riding, are those traditional non-voters who get motivated to come out for him, or are they people who traditionally vote Conservative and switch? And I'm, depending on the area, I think you're onto something in BC for sure, but I do think there is an element of people who would not normally vote that come out and vote for him. It's not a pure robbing from the...
Right.
By the way, he's run a shit campaign, eh? Like, he should be doing better. I know he's a racist and a horrible person and all that sort of shit, but he should have done better.
Why? What should he have done?
Your guy was a blackface, man.
Oh! Hey. Well, we're not,
Well, I mean,
that's true.
I'm going to choose not to respond to that.
I think Jenni made that point earlier.
All right, who's got a question?
How about Obama?
Question out there? Comment? Anything?
So something that was touched on a bit earlier tonight was the coalition talk, and we've seen a bit of that coming from the NDP, some anti-coalition memes and whatnot coming from the Conservatives. Any thoughts on how this could play out either this week or post-election?
I'll let these guys go. They have a much different opinion than me.
Well, then we should all go. But I'll go first. Okay. I think that Singh made a mistake talking about coalitions, because it takes us down a rabbit hole of discussing parliamentary configurations and what the conventions are, etc. I think, though, that the essential idea behind what he was saying, and he's, I think, trying to get back there, was quite clever. So what happens at the end of every campaign is that the Liberals apply vote pressure on the votes to the left of them, whether it's the NDP or the Greens, to turn away from that party and come vote for the Liberal Party to stop the dangerous Conservatives from taking office. And when the NDP are running, as Jack Layton always did, for instance, avowedly to be Prime Minister, and that's what they insist on right to the last day that they're running for Prime Minister, they're very vulnerable to that strategic vote pressure. And they can lose a lot of votes in the last week of the campaign as people get practical about what the outcome is going to be. So I think that Singh actually addressing that head on and saying, you do not need to worry about a Conservative government if I'm elected or by voting NDP. We're as opposed to the Conservatives as you are, and implicitly, we're going to make sure that there's a Liberal government after this election, whether you vote, even if you vote for us. And so that, I think, for people who were saying, I want to vote NDP, but I really don't want Scheer, that's a comforting message, and I think it was well delivered.
You're looking at me. I agree with all that. I want to skip forward. I think isn't the most interesting thing to talk about is what if Trudeau doesn't win a plurality of seats, but is still the Prime Minister, right? So from my perspective, I think that the coalition talk has started, it lit the match on talking about minority scenarios. And I agree with everything that David said. He did it clumsily in a way that might have been really, really unfortunate for him. Because if Singh had just said, this is all about stopping Scheer from being Prime Minister, and I'm for that, don't worry about it, you can vote NDP, and there's no risk of that, he might have been in an okay place. Coalition started talking about, like, is somebody going to be forming this government? But what if, this is the great fun thing 4 days from outside of this election result, what if Trudeau is not his dad in 1972? What if he doesn't win by 1 seat? What if he loses by 1 seat?
Well, he stays on.
He stays on. So you and I have had this argument. So I agree with that. I agree with that. That's
You don't
where
give up. You don't give up power lightly. You think
Oh.
very,
don't
very
give up power.
long and
That's
hard
where-
before you
no, but
walk
Jenni,
out of the
before
Prime
you
Minister's office.
so let's just chart out the two paths, right? So the one path is there's no way, as David says, which I agree with ultimately. You don't give up power. You don't give up power. That's a cracker thing to do, and you do technically. You're still the Prime Minister, and under the parliamentary code, you get to be the sitting Prime Minister. But there's going to be a 2008 type argument in the country about whether or not the guy who comes first gets to get first crack at forming government. And there's going to be all this stuff. And after SNC-Lavalin and after blackface, it's going to further diminish the brand and bruise the brand of Trudeau when he looks like he's saying, hang on. I agree with you. Ultimately, you go, hey, you know what? Fuck this noise. I am still the Prime Minister, and I've got to hang on, and I can form and command a majority. But Scheer, it would be interesting if Scheer...
Jump in, Jen.
What happens? What happens?
What happens is whoever wins the most seats is going to be Prime Minister. Like
That's
what
not
always-
what's going to happen. Unless it's a Liberal outcome.
No.
I know you hate that answer, but that is the honest answer.
Why would that be the answer?
Well, the answer is because there has been the only reason we're all entertaining this is because this election has been so fucking boring that we are sitting with 4 days left to go, that we're inventing coalition, inventing something to talk about. At the end of the day,
It's a cool thing to talk about.
Well, listen, we lived through coalition stuff, and at the end
Tried one, fought one.
Won.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My understanding is that Harper thought he was done on the day of the press conference, and he had to be convinced
No.
that he had
when
room
Gilles
to fight.
When Gilles Duceppe stood up with Stéphane Dion and Jack Layton, I can tell you, Stephen Harper did not think he was done that day.
No, I bet that's right. I bet that's right, but I don't think it's 2000.
So, anyways, all
Oh,
this
yeah.
to say, if I can just say something.
You can.
Thank you.
No, you can't.
At the end of the day, Trudeau has not seriously entertained any talk of a coalition. He has been very vague on it. Singh has done what he has done on every major issue, from the religious symbols bill on Bill 21 to this. He has gone back and forth in terms, because why would Jagmeet Singh want to be in a coalition with Justin Trudeau?
But
a guy
I don't
who's
think
going
he wants
get
to be.
a guy, but that's what you're saying.
No, you know, you and I have had this argument before.
Oh,
There's
my
a
goodness,
distinction
can I-
between a coalition and a minority.
No, you're
Yes!
talking. Oh
A
my
coalition government is 1914 under
Yeah, because you guys
Borden,
keep
when you
saying-
have, you know,
Oh
multiple
my
parties
God.
in the
you
cabinet.
Guys but you made the example of 2004. You guys had the most seats. So Jack Layton propping you up was propping up Paul Martin with the most seats. Paul Martin was still Prime Minister.
He was fucking us day by day.
But Paul Martin, for a year and a half before we won, was still Prime Minister.
But that's a
Sorry,
minority
Jenni, you're right.
situation.
It would be unusual, and it's not a direct comparison
So what
to
I'm
2004.
Exactly.
That's right, for
It is
So
not
what I'm
because-
saying is there is no interest for anyone. Trudeau has not talked about it, and Jagmeet Singh, why would he? The Liberals are going to have an SNC investigation. They're going to have an SNC investigation. He's two of them. Thank you very much.
Why
from
two?
From the Insurance Bureau.
I
of
didn't even
Canada
understand that.
State.
Why does the bureau? Why do the insurers think there would be two?
No, but he's been dinged by the ethics commissioner twice. Singh has been campaigning against him the entire campaign. What is in Jagmeet Singh's interest to prop up Justin Trudeau to be Prime Minister?
I'll tell you
there is none.
That's not true. I'll tell you exactly what it is. And
No, it's
tell you
it's in the Liberals' interest for Jagmeet Singh to do that.
No, it's clearly in his interest.
Could I go? I think that there's something that's fundamentally different about this, and it relates to the single biggest mistake the Conservative Party made in this election campaign, and that is not to have a reasonable climate change plan, not to have any serious attempt at tackling climate change.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
In fact, to basically give the finger to people who care about climate change by announcing highway expansion on the day of the climate march. And I think that
David Herle is campaigning now to replace Justin Trudeau as leader of the Liberal Party.
Well, hey.
The podcast camaraderie is breaking down here in the final few days. It's not partisanship. It's kind of personal, actually.
Shut up! I actually didn't say that to make a political speech. I actually said to try to set this up, which is that I believe that the climate change forward coalition that includes the Bloc, the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens will not allow the Conservatives to form government and spend 4 years not doing anything about climate change. That will both bind the coalition and legitimize the coalition in the public.
Nothing legitimizes it by having the separatist Bloc Québécois. That will be a gift to Andrew Scheer if that's actually what happens.
Probably.
I do think just one point here. If you look at the public, not that engaged in this election, I think we've all sort of agreed on that in various levels. Public opinion is what changed in 2008. It wasn't procedure, it wasn't all these other things. The public shifted against the coalition. And so when you look at this election, I think you can have a scenario where the public, they vote for whoever won, and we're talking about most seats. What if Scheer wins the most votes as well, which I think is a very real possibility in addition to most seats. And so there's sort of some basic fairness issues that come at play with the public. They suddenly wake up, say, well, yeah, we sort of weren't paying attention. Whoa, the winner didn't win. Now, not saying that's going to happen, but I wouldn't discount the public opinion, and I wouldn't discount Alberta in particular being so outraged at a level I don't think we can quite understand here in Toronto at an outcome like that.
Well, I'm not saying it won't be divisive.
I don't know.
I won't say it won't be divisive, Dennis, because you're right. The third of the country that voted Conservative will be outraged if they win seats and votes and don't form the government. And in parts of the country, that will be a huge regional issue. But the 70% of the people who voted against the Conservatives will not be troubled by it at all.
That's exactly what I mean.
Right.
And by the way, Donald Trump has 3 million fewer votes. No, but I mean, if we're going to make that the standard, then you're going to get that kind of pissing match. Like, I mean, seriously, and I'm not, but you're going to get into that kind of pissing match, right? If you're going to say, well, it's all about popular vote, you're going to go, well, Jesus Christ, that obviously isn't the standard. Otherwise, we'd have a different president.
We have a question at the back from the owner.
Yes,
Right here,
please,
actually.
give us a question.
Yes, right here, actually. Big fan of the podcast, and even if it's disintegrating before our very eyes.
It's the glare of the lights.
You've all advised powerful people, and I want to ask a counterfactual. If you were advising young MP Justin Trudeau, who was interested in running for the leadership of the Liberal Party, and he came to you and he said he had this black and brown-faced stuff in his past, and there were photos, there was probably video, plenty of people saw him do it, and he now knew it was wrong, and he also knew that it would run exactly counter to the kind of brand that he wanted to build. What would your advice to him be?
I always assume that everything becomes public, that everything comes out. I always assume that no matter how awful it is, it will be better on your terms than any other terms. So if I was in the position I've held with the politicians I had advised, the first second I knew about that, I would have been talking about methods of getting that out into the public domain on our terms.
I know 3 things about you, David, that the people here do not. So be careful if you want to elevate this to a point of principle.
Well, it's. I assume we're talking about young Justin Trudeau, first elected in the riding of Papineau, and as my friend Scott rightly said on a podcast a couple weeks ago, that a issues management strategy is actually not doing anything. I think that probably for the last 11 years, that strategy has worked well for Justin Trudeau, and I can't fault him in probably using that issues management strategy. He got through 1, 2, 3 elections, 1 leadership race. He was prime minister for 4 years, and it never came out.
And I know this is a horrifying answer to people, but to pile on to what Jenni said, we're also, 39 days to a 42-day campaign, and it appears to not have been determinative in this campaign. So
No, but I don't think you're right. but we talked earlier, I think it knocked the Liberals right off their game. I think it totally
It's
disrupted
had,
their
it's had
strategy.
indirect impacts.
Right.
But it hasn't if electorally what it will have done is actually have made them hesitant from what I talked about earlier in terms of the last week that they've had no negative ads. But it actually electorally has not hurt them. And I hate to say this because I think I am like aghast by the whole thing. I was like stunned, and I know I said it at the time on our podcast, in the media. If it had been a candidate for any party under any circumstance, they would have been removed as a candidate, and their entire careers politically would have been done. Like not even like it wouldn't have even been discussed.
I wrote that also in the Globe Mail. I mean,
Yeah.
there's, if you want to be really bloodless about it from an issues management perspective, which I think is the way you pose the question, there's an X and Y axis. And the X-axis is how bad is this, and the Y-axis is how likely is it to come out. And you have to sort of put those things together and go, well.
You can explain this to us mathematically, how this works?
Seriously,
like, I mean, to Scott's point, it coming out in the campaign made it more political than it probably would have if it had come out in a non-campaign. And so I actually heard from people that were working on Liberal campaigns in the suburbs of the 416, so the Scarboroughs, Etobicoke, what have you, it was actually became more of a, I hate to use it, but a galvanizing issue for Liberals that are like, okay, well, our guys.
My God, you're going full Judy Scrow on us.
Yeah.
But it actually like it brought Liberals into campaign offices, feeling that their guy was under attack. I think it's a gasp, but I heard that from more than one person.
Right. I always think it's way worse when you get busted on something and then when you came clean. Yes.
Okay, so you guys have had a podcast where you called this the Seinfeld election, right? So this is an election about nothing. If you look at the polls, the leaders are all negatively polling behind their party, right? So
Is that right?
I think there's
Even or behind, nobody's ahead.
Yeah, there's generally, we're not talking about issues. Like this has been maybe the worst election of all time in terms of this being like a substantive election. And so generally my view is that tends to favor the incumbent. All the big surge of votes, so Jenni can talk about this in more detail because I was part of it, but you know, Harper sort of held his own on his votes in the last election, but Trudeau got a whole bunch of new voters out.
We got 5.6 million votes last
election. So in an election about nothing, where the leaders are all generally viewed as shit behind their party, you would tend to see, although that might favor the incumbent, you know, you would tend to see a reduction of all those people who came out to vote for Trudeau in the last election. I'd like to know if all that's true, which there seems to be some consensus about, why the big turnout in advance voting polls? That's the part I can't understand. If, you know, this favors the incumbent, it's election about nothing, no one really likes the leaders, people are plugging their nose and voting, why was there record turnout at the advance polls?
I actually think it could be as simple as it was easy to vote in the advance polls. I think that the 4 days over Thanksgiving, I think there were people that outside of Atlantic Canada, Monday is a stat holiday for all of us. And most people do their turkey on Sundays, and I think a lot of people just decided to vote there. In terms of the, so I don't know. It's actually been funny. I've been waiting for the riding by riding results to be released by Elections Canada, because I'm a bit of a nerd that way, to actually see what the riding by riding turnouts are. One of the things, though, about the 2.5 million new voters that voted in the last election, which the Liberals, for the most part, I think, benefited from, the difference between, I think, the Liberals and us, if you're looking at it from a data point of view, is the Liberals actually have information on those 2.5 million voters, because they've been doing what we did for years, which is you are regularly communicating with those people. So you are talking to them through phone calls from the party, surveys from MP offices, door knocking, what have you. So they actually have 2.5 million people in their database, in their party's electoral database that we don't have. I assume the Conservatives, if they had 2.5 million people, which we would have identified as non-supporters, we just stopped talking to those people. Like if they were what we would call lifetime unknowns and current non-supporters, those people are people we never would have communicated. So there is a possibility that we are all underestimating the vote that the Liberal Party has actually gotten out, because there are 2.5 million new voters who we know might be upset that proportional representation didn't go through, or they feel that like the province have fucked up cannabis legalization, but we don't have any information on them. The only people that could possibly have information on them is the Liberal Party of Canada. So that could actually speak to an increase as well. But I think the only—
That's the most optimistic thing about the Liberals I've heard in a while.
No kidding.
That gave me a-
I'm like,
that gave me a little
was
bit
I
of wind in
supposed to
myself.
say that? I'm like, wow.
Lynette, I would be very surprised if despite the advanced polls, if the turnout wasn't below what it was in 2015, and especially among that youth cohort, the evidence even before blackface was that they were dispersed among all the parties in relatively equal numbers and not terribly motivated. So I don't expect nearly the same kind of turnout, and there almost never is for an incumbent.
but once someone
Obama
has voted,
didn't get the same youth vote in 2012 that he got in 2008. It's just really hard.
But once someone has voted, they are more likely to vote again. So there were 2.5 million new voters that voted in 2015. They are more apt to go out and vote in 2019.
Great. One last question we're allowed. Is it Ted Gretzner there at the back?
Well,
The
first of all,
owner
thank-
of the pilot, ladies and
that be?
gentlemen. Ted Gretzner.
Our host.
So first of all, thanks everyone for coming to the pilot. We appreciate everyone being here. This has been a fun night. So I hate questions that have a preface, but I have to preface this. So I spend a lot of time in Alberta in my job, and I work in the oil and gas business. And I was out there last week, and the prevailing mood was, it doesn't matter who wins because we're screwed anyway. That their view was, even if Scheer wins, he's going to owe Quebec or he's going to owe Ontario, and he's going to have to pay more attention to where the votes are, where the seats are, than them. So past elections, now Tuesday morning, your guy was the prime minister, or Elizabeth May's team, you're the prime minister. How do you start to put stuff back together? Because the one fella who's a deep conservative in Alberta told me last week, he said, we see more alignment with the BQ than we do with any other party. So how do you start to put stuff back together?
Well, the Liberal Party knows exactly what to do in a situation like this, and that is from Saskatchewan and Alberta and Manitoba, you put senators in the cabinet. And that immediately bonds you to that community, and you're on the way back politically. No, that's going to be, I mean, the national unity implications of this election are not sufficiently talked about. It is in the aftermath. I think it's going to be a big issue, and not in Quebec, but in the prairies. I think that the Bloc Québécois phenomenon is not a separatist phenomenon. I know the Federalists always say that, but in this case, I think it is generally true, that it is an expression of Francophone desire to tell English Canadians to mind their fucking business when it comes to Quebec culture. So I don't think it's about separatism, but I think that the reality, it isn't just the result of this election campaign, is that Alberta and Saskatchewan are on a path of collision with the rest of the country. Yeah. And that the rest of the country is favoring a set of policies that will diminish the economic success of those provinces. And they're being asked to just accept that. And they don't appear like they're interested in just accepting that. So I think we're in for some tough times.
Yeah, I agree. I speak to a lot of people in Alberta, and there's always been rumblings of people in Alberta not being happy. But over the last few years, it's a different level of unhappiness. It's people that I'm from the Reform side of our party, and these are people that would have voted for Joe Clark in the 2000 election when he was running in Calgary Centre, who are now openly talking about separation. So it's a much different dynamic, whether it's Andrew Scheer, who might be a little bit more poised, in a better position to deal with it, being a prairie representative and having the majority of the 34 seats.
Didn't look good in that Hamilton Tiger Cat shirt I put on Twitter the other day.
I do think, one interesting point is Kenny has promised a referendum on equalization. And, you think a referendum might be an escape valve, but there's no escape valve there. It's impossible to imagine what, what happens after that. And so what I'm looking for, at least in Alberta and partly Saskatchewan, is where is that escape valve? Where is that way to let out some of that steam? And it's not obvious what it's going to be in the short term.
David, Scott, anything to wrap up here on this question before we call it a day?
I would just, I would amplify Dennis's point that I think that this issue is going to get more, not less complicated, and we are, as lots of people are going to say on Monday night, a lot more like 1972 to 1979 that we've been in a long time. We're going to end up in a minority situation. We're going to end up with a Trudeau, and we're going to end up with a lot of agreed people in Western Canada.
Well, actually, I was just, because I know that we're ending things now, we're kind of getting the hook, and I just wanted to say thank you to David, because without David...
No kidding, eh?
We wouldn't...
The Herle Burly is named Burly!
You know Herle Burly. And I have to say, it has been phenomenal to get to know you, to get to know Scott, to do this. It's been the most fun I've had in this campaign, so I'm being very selfish with this, but I just want to thank you because you brought all these people out, and it has been a great thing for this election. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I love this group of people.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. The Herle Burly podcast. David Herle, Jenni Byrne, Scott Reid, David Rosenberg, Dennis Matthews. How would everyone feel if we had a post-election event? Would people come out? All right, we're going to work on a post-election. How do you guys feel about that? Is that good? So stay tuned, everyone. And we'll see you back then. But I want to admit that you've set the bar very high for fun, and thank you very much for making Election 43 actually exciting. So thank you very much. Thank you to IBC, the Insurance Bureau, and thank you to all of you for coming. We'll see you again soon.